Hello, welcome back to the Prepared Mind channel. What a nice holiday vacation we got. Let's see, we got Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Monday was Christmas, and here we are Tuesday. And they're already going at it. Welcome back to the channel. Let's get into it. Okay, today, first day back after Christmas vacation, I thought, fine, let's relax a little. We're going to cruise through this week, get to the new year, and then it'll start afterwards. No such chance. I step into my office. My daytime supervisor comes to me and reports, I think the commandant just said something a little bit rough, a little crazy. I can't remember what expression he used, but he was surprised. Commandant of the Marine Corps, which is basically the leader of the Marine Corps. A little different than the Army, but the Commandant, General Neller, let Marines over in Norway know that there's a war coming. And he used the phrase, there's a big-ass fight. Now, he wasn't declaring war. He wasn't promising that it's going to happen. But he's basically putting the troops on alert. Now, what this does for me, thinking as a civilian, as a prepper, as an ex-Marine, as a former Marine, as a still Marine, but I'm wearing civvies. I don't care how anyone, quantifies that. Anyways, how do I think about it? How am I going to deal with it if they go to war over there? As a prepper, you've got to be ready. Now, I've been hearing for months through both Army and Marine Corps sources that we're going to go to war, and that it's going to be a shooting war, and that it's also going to be in North Korea. Do I really know anything? No, I don't. I just know that everyone's training and getting ready for war that's coming. And this typically precedes economic collapse, or economic collapse, follows the declaration of war. Anyways, we're in big trouble, folks. And I really thought we would make it into the new year before I had to bring this subject up again. But here it is. I mean, right off the bat, right out the gate. Now, the thing about Commandant Neller talking is he's over in Europe. Right now, the Marines are training up in Norway at a particular base that they haven't been at, I think, since World War II. They're doing cold weather training and such, and I guess the Russians don't like that a lot. And I can't blame the Russians, right? And I can't blame the Americans. Everyone's pissed off, and people that are paid to fight, that is, fighting men, their job is to kill people and break things. That's what they get paid to do. Whether we're talking about the Marines, the Army, or whether we're talking about the Russian Army or the Chinese Army, everyone practices fighting, trains for fighting, prepares to fight. Right? And given the order, they will go and start fighting. With guns, with rockets, with tanks, with missiles, with whatever they've got. Being in the civilian world, we're not on the front line, but we're not absent from the war. Meaning there's a consequence to war. And typically civilians are just counted among the casualties. The best thing you and I can do is be prepared. With food and water, shelter, clothing, medicine, means of self-defense. Right? And a plan. This idea of going into a shooting war in North Korea today is all the more plausible because China, in the two provinces that border North Korea, they are moving in troops. They're moving in equipment. There's a lot of activity up there. What I find hard to believe is that they would start a war in the middle of winter there. Right? The Battle of the Chosin Reservoir was horrifying if you read the details of the history. It was so cold that in order to get their guns to operate, Marines were told to piss on the actions of their rifle. Just to get them to operate, to warm them up that much. It was a horrifying battle. It was considered by us Marines to be the greatest fighting retreat in history. It wasn't a run, a retreat. It was a fighting retreat. That is, as they retreated, they were fighting the whole way. It is a nasty country up there. And the idea of American troops going back there to fight is bothersome, to say the least. But this idea that China is going to stand by and watch, it doesn't sit well with me. China now has their troops. They're moving in. Same with the Russians over in Europe. There's a lot of trouble in Europe. You know, who's going to step out on whose side? You and I can't know. We can't understand fully because we're not really in the loop. But in every war involving the European continent, in every war everywhere, sides basically are picked ahead of time. Who's going to come down on whose sides? Who's allies with who? Who is the axis or the enemy? Right? It is going to be a big mess. So when Commandant Neller called it a big-ass fight that's coming, he wasn't making a guarantee or a promise. He was just advising everyone this is coming. And there could be a fight with Russia up in northern Europe, northeastern Europe. That could develop. There could be skirmishes, or there could just be a lot of threats and saber rattling. But what this does, this puts everyone on notice. Right? They're ratcheting up the saber rattling. At some point, do they pull the saber out of the sheath and start waving it around at each other? Right? We came pretty close to some armed conflict down in Ukraine, out in the Black Sea. In fact, the whole episode with Ukraine had to do with the Crimean Peninsula. There was an attempt, a political attempt, a subversive CIA-type political event that was occurring there. There was an attempt to cut Mother Russia off of the Black Sea, a major seaport of theirs. And it failed. And it was very, very, the situation was tenuous at best. It was bad. Right? So when I'm saying we need to consider what's going on as preppers, it is because North America, right here, you know, we are geographically isolated from the world by the Pacific Ocean, by the Atlantic Ocean. They're on either side of us, but it's not that kind of world anymore. In World War I and World War II, we were basically isolated from the rest of the world. Yes, there were Japanese balloon bombs on the West Coast and some submarines. And on the East Coast, they did have U-boats, German U-boats, sinking ships, making life difficult, but they didn't stop America. Today, it's a different kind of world. If we go to war with North Korea, is North Korea going to fold like Iraq did in the first Gulf War? Or will they be fighting on many fronts, not only with troops on the ground, as in bullets, men screaming and dying and bleeding all over the earth? Will there be other types of attacks? Primarily looking at a potential ICBM launch. Do we have the technology to knock it out of the air, or in some way have countermeasures electronically to stopping them? Secondarily, can they do a cyber attack, a meaningful cyber attack that cripples us here in the United States? It's quite possible. There have been probes on a daily basis for years into our nation's financial system, into our nation's infrastructure. That's power plants, everything having to do with how our nation works, how goods and services move, food, electricity, everything. In addition to a cyber attack or an ICBM, how about sleeper cells? Since I was a young man, the notion or idea of Soviet Union infiltrators brought over as small children, secretly indoctrinated in their homes here in the United States of America, but raised to speak and sound and look and act like Americans, but being totally indoctrinated with communist Soviet thinking, where they lived a dual life. That idea has always been out there, and it still exists today. But what about North Korea? There's a lot of Koreans here in America. And I bet 99.99% of them are good, hardworking men and women. The ones I've met are. But what about the ones that have been brought over here as deep, covert agents? Is there a possibility of that? If the Soviets could do it, why not the Koreans? Could these cells, these sleeper-type cells, populated with indoctrinated deep cover agents, could they perform terrorist acts on our nation? Certainly on the West Coast, Los Angeles, the Bay Area, Portland, SeaTac, maybe Anchorage, Alaska. What kind of havoc could they wreak? I've had many discussions with people in the power industry, in the transportation industry, in the fuel or energy industry. We are, just like every other nation in the world, vulnerable to greater and lesser degrees than everyone, but we are vulnerable to in-place attacks. What I mean by that is there are not troops stationed at every transformer substation. There's not troops guarding the entire pipeline, fuel, oil, gasoline, piping infrastructure. In fact, our country is so spread out and large, it would be impossible to guard every square inch. That's kind of the reason we have what's known as the militia. That is, every fighting American, or every American is a fighting man that would fight for his country. But right now, people have it in their head that the government's job is to do everything for us, but they can't. So let's assume that Commandant Neller is correct and that we have a big-ass fight coming, and it could be fought in both Northeast Europe as well as on the Korean Peninsula. Let's just take him at his word when he says there's a war coming. Let's just assume that, yeah, China is on the border over in North Korea, and the Russian troops are more than willing to go to fight with Marines and Army in Europe, as well as other NATO forces. You and I can't do anything about that here. Right? We can't. We're not fighting that. But we can be attacked on our soil by them in the variety of ways, the myriad of ways I've described. They can take out our infrastructure, our financial system, our electricity. They could interrupt food supplies, fuel supplies, energy supplies. Basically everything it takes for the civilian population here in the U.S. to live. If this war starts, that is shit hitting the fan. Somewhere else. But the moment it comes here, and we see it in the form of an ICBM that was launched, whether or not it hits us, you can guarantee the continuity of government activity by the federal, the state, and even local governments is going to come into play. Even if they launch an ICBM and it's shot down, you can bet your ass that war powers will be, how do I put this nicely? They will be communicated to us in possibly not nice ways. That is, we could go right to martial law. Especially if there's sleeper cells that are terrorizing. Especially if there are cyber attacks left and right, and that affects the money system and other computer-controlled infrastructure systems. It is amazing to me, it is shocking to me to still learn, to this day, I'm learning every day different ways that our world is tied together with computers through the internet. And for me, I cannot understand for the life of me, guys, why the fuck everything that's that important is plugged into the internet. All you got to do is walk over to the wall, take a pair of pliers, cut the fucking cord. No one needs to control a power plant from somewhere else. You control the power plant from within the power plant. Why leave that system open to being hacked? I can think of a number of places and ways that that's important. Nuclear power plants, hydroelectric power plants. How about fuel refineries? How about the electrical power grid? Why does it need to be connected to the internet where it's vulnerable to cyber hacking? How about this? How about something like the Stuxnet, which was a worm, a virus, a Trojan horse that's existing inside the computer systems? That all it takes is a signal, a command, a date to come up, and they go into operational mode, these viruses, these Trojan horses that are inside, that have wormed their way around in, and they're just waiting. They themselves are sleeper cells, waiting to commit terrorism. However, that signal can be triggered. You and I have to be ready. We have to understand this threat. Yeah, Commandant Neller, 4-star Marine Corps general, he is programmed to kick ass on the battlefield. But he talked about this war not just being about guns, but an informational war, a political war. And I invite you to go read the article. I'm going to see if I can't get it down below for you. It's an informational war, meaning propaganda. Am I being propagandized right now? Probably. Putting those troops in Norway and going about with the big ass fight discussion and saying there's a war coming, is that propaganda? Is that psychological? Is that informational? Is that political? It's all of those things. But it's important to remember those things are always backed by military might. And I've seen how that works, how it's used. A lot of men have. It's not a secret. If we do go to war, though, you can expect that our isolation geographically doesn't have the prophylactic protection it used to. It just doesn't. They can have cells here. They can hit it with ICBMs. They can use cyber warfare, informational warfare. It is going to be a 360-degree war, meaning every facet of our life will be under attack. The best thing you and I can do is be prepared for it mentally. That is, understanding the threat and how pervasive it is in every aspect of our lives here in the homeland, here in the United States of America, on our soil. The war can be brought to us without the enemy ever leaving their shores, because the enemy can already be here. The enemy can be a computer program, and the enemy can also launch from thousands of miles away and rain death and terror down upon us. Now, I'm not trying to say this to scare anyone or frighten anyone. Fear porn coming from me. Who the hell am I? I'm just a guy on his couch with a scotch. Right? If you want fear porn, go watch the mainstream news. They'll scare the living shit out of you if you were to actually sit down and pay attention to what they're saying and think about the consequences, which is what I always do. Okay, so Commandant Neller, he's talking. What does that really mean? What does that really mean to me and my understanding? So I'm here to share my understanding with you, and you guys can think about it. You can decide, is this anything to worry about? Should we give a shit? So what if a 4-star general isn't threatening Russia, right? So what if Chinese troops are stacked against the border in North Korea? You know, it's getting that close. They're wanting this war. There's a lot of tension. I hope it can all be diffused. Right? So I'm praying for the best, but I'm prepping for the worst. If they come over here and start disrupting our way of life with terror attacks, cyber attacks, and God forbid nuclear ordnance delivered by ICBM, we need to be prepared, seriously, with food, with water. We need to understand how our shelters work, not only sheltering us from the elements, but protecting us from those who would do us harm. Other people, other Americans who are desperate, who haven't prepared the way you have. They aren't your enemy proper, as in they don't understand you. They would become your enemy if they want to take from you because they're desperate, because they're scared, because they're ill-prepared, both provisionally and psychologically, mentally, psychically. This is where your intuition that has caused you to start prepping will give you the satisfaction, the comfort, right, the peace of mind to know that we face these threats from whichever way they come. But you have the satisfaction, the comfort in mind to know that you can get through it by having 3 months of food, by having 3 months of medicine, whatever your medicinal needs are, by having 6 months of food, 9 months of food, whatever it is you think is going to need to get through this. I think you should have at least 1 year's worth of food. But you've got to start somewhere. Start with 1 month. Food is going to be a huge component. Water is going to be a huge component. You need to make sure you have access to water and that you have the means and the capacity or the understanding on how sanitation works and what you can do. Once again, sanitation will be huge. If we lose power and water, not only do we need to sanitize the water, but you're going to need to clean things. Pots and pans, dishes. You're going to need to clean your clothes and clean your bodies. So I recommend chlorine tablets is a big one. And as always, on the preparedmind.club, we have all of these provisions, all of these preps lined out to help you if you need that kind of help. So don't be afraid to go over there and take a look around, see what I pointed to. Everything on there, either someone is sworn by, right, the Almighty that they've tested it and own it, or I myself have tested it and reviewed it and or own it. Right? We don't have anything on there just because it looks cute. Everything has been tested and attested to. But when a Marine Corps general is saying we're going to get in a big-ass fight, and he's saying it publicly, and he's saying it to Marines, that says something to me. Right? When he says there's a war coming, that means a lot to me. I know what it means when they start saying get ready. Again, it could be psychological warfare against the enemy, but it's also designed, intended to make sure that everyone in the Corps and everyone in the military, indeed, understand the severity of what we are facing. And I do have to say that Marines and soldiers train to fight, but nobody wants to go and face almost certain death in a war zone of this magnitude. Right? Despite all the chivalrous talk and big macho, manly, masculine talk, people really aren't praying for war. Right? Act more as a deterrent than anything else because we haven't been in these huge wars, but we've been in a lot of small ones for the past couple of decades. You know, pray to God that this doesn't come to pass. But in case it does, you need to be prepared because chance favors the prepared mind is yours. Get on over to the club if you haven't already. Take a look at what we got there. You know, Godspeed to everyone. God help us all. Happy New Year to you. And they didn't even give us a chance to catch our breath after Christmas before they let this shit out of the bag. You guys be cool, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.